From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is a big pleasure for me to welcome you to this special program today. My name is Martha Kennedy. I'm a curator of popular graphic art in the Prints and Photographs Division, and we are very pleased to have two outstanding and funny cartoonists with us today to share their perspectives on political cartooning. This panel is co-sponsored by the Prints and Photographs Division, the Swan Foundation for Caricature and Cartoon, and the Interpretive Programs Office. This event is part of public programming connected with a very fine special exhibition entitled Pointing Their Pens, Her Block and Fellow Cartoonists Confront the Issues. And this is curated by my colleague, Sarah Duke, who I think is in the audience here. Another preliminary comment. We do plan time for questions at the end of the cartoonist presentations, and I hope you have some questions. This program is being filmed for webcast, and that's why we have all these blinding lights up right now. So please understand that if you ask a question, you are giving permission to be filmed. Signe Wilkinson and Ann Telnaes have come to the library at a time when public attention and debate over the significance of the Charlie Hebdo tragedy and the role of free speech have been reinvigorated. Causes, you might ask? Doonesbury's creator, Gary Trudeau, recently commented critically on the nature of the Charlie Hebdo cartoonist's work, describing it as punching down. Many of his peers disagreed, including our cartoonists here today. Also, when the Penn-Faulkner Writers Group recently decided to make an award to Charlie Hebdo magazine, 5 member writers publicly declined to attend the group's fundraising gala. So, against this unanticipated backdrop, we ask these two distinguished cartoonists to share their responses to the tragic murders of the 5 cartoonists at Charlie Hebdo magazine in January of this year, their thoughts on free speech, other cartoonist-related work, and their takes on Trudeau's comments. In addition to these very timely concerns, we also ask them to show and discuss their own controversial cartoons and cartoons relating to women's issues and gender issues. Signe and Ann are among a very small number of women who pursue political cartooning as their main professional focus. Okay, I'm going to... Signe Wilkinson is the editorial cartoonist for the Philadelphia Daily News. And
I'm on the left.
Right. And she is also contributing to the Philadelphia Inquirer these days. In 1992, she became the first woman to win the Pulitzer-Prize for her political cartoons, and this prize-winning group focused on human needs and social conditions. She has received many other prestigious awards, including the Thomas Nast Award from the Overseas Press Club in 1996, 2000, 2006, and this year, too. She's also received the Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award in 2002 and 2008, and the Visionary Woman Award from Philadelphia's Moore College of Art and Design in 2011. She served as president of the Association of American Editorial Cartoonists in 1994 and 95. She's published 2 collections of her wonderfully hard-hitting, eye-catching cartoons, and they include One Nation Under Surveillance in 2005, and Abortion Cartoons on Demand in 1992. She's also drawn cartoons for Ms. Magazine, Organic Gardening, and other publications. Her work has been exhibited widely in group and solo shows. She launched The Family Tree, which is a comic strip that was syndicated and distributed by United Media in 2007 and ended it in 2011. Ann Telnaes, on the right, creates animated editorial cartoons and a blog of print cartoons, animated gifs and sketches for the Washington Post. In 2001, she became the second woman to win the Pulitzer-Prize for her political cartoons, and they focused on the presidential election of 2000. Other notable awards she has received are the Clifford K. and James T. Berryman Award from the National Press Foundation in 2003 and 2006, and in 2011, she was a finalist for the Herblock Prize in Editorial Cartooning. In 1997, she also won a National Headliners Award and other awards. She has served as the vice president of the Association of American Editorial Cartoonists and is a member of the Cartoonist Rights Network International. Her cartoons have been exhibited nationally and internationally, including a solo exhibit here at the library in 2004. She has published 2 collections of her bold, streamlined cartoon drawings in Humor's Edge, which was a companion volume to her exhibition, and Dick in 2006, which revolved around cartoons of then Vice President Dick Cheney. Beginning in 2002, Ann contributed to the daily comic Six Chicks for several years and to the online publication Women's E-News from 2002 to 2009. Much more could be said about both of these wonderful cartoonists, but I would like to ask you to welcome them to our presence today. All right, I'm going to ask Signe to begin by sharing her reactions to the Charlie Hebdo tragedy and how she framed her thought process in responding to it first. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. When we got started on this, planning this event, it was long before Charlie Hebdo. It was long before the more recent controversies. And we were sort of wondering what the focus would be, just free speech. And I regret to say that tragedy has really become the centerpiece of what most cartoonists are talking and arguing about right now. And just to be clear, my position is that cartoonists don't kill people. Cartoons can't kill people. Humorless religious fanatics generally do, or more often they do. A cartoon, a little cartoon, a drawing on paper, pixels on a screen, cannot stone anyone to death, it cannot sever a head, it cannot send anyone to jail. And so the proportionality of what we're talking about, a cartoon, the drawing of a cartoon, and the results that happened on January 7th in Paris are just so disproportionate that it's almost hard to even talk about it as well, you know, one thing equals the other. But my interest in this goes back to the Danish Cartoons, which started in 2005 and erupted in 2006 after several months of ginning up controversy about them. And I learned then that it's really not about the image of Muhammad being prohibited from drawing. And that's what I'd like to talk about today, is the use of symbols and how we come to focus on one thing, but in reality, for at least me as a cartoonist, it's been quite different. This, of course, this is grabbed off the internet, so I'm sorry, the resolution isn't good enough for you to be really shocked and appalled that I am showing them. And that is, this is a collection of the Danish cartoons with the one that caused the most controversy up on the top with the turban. When that happened, it took a while for the controversy to bubble over from Europe to the United States. And nobody really knew that what it was all about, that drawing Muhammad was even a problem. One of the first papers to publish the image in the United States was the Austin Statesman American, which did it too early. No one knew that that this was a prohibited image, and they got no reaction. People didn't know they were supposed to be afraid and appalled. But shortly thereafter, it really hit the fan, and there were only about 5 other papers in the country that managed to put in a news item in the paper. And one of them was the Philadelphia Inquirer. I worked at the Daily News at the time, and our paper did not. The Inquirer put one in one of the interior pages in a little box with an explanation, and just to alert its readers, this is what we're talking about. There were protests, there were many follow-ups, meetings with people who were unhappy. But what it did was start a conversation in the city of Philadelphia, and right now we have a very strong interfaith movement because it brought people together to actually talk about these things across religious lines. My editor, when I said, "Ooh, I want to draw Mohammed," said, "Not so sure about that." And he had backed me up on many, many other controversies. So I stewed for a couple of days to figure out how I could do it. And I did this cartoon. The Big Fat Book of Offensive Religious Cartoons. That's Muhammad, third from the right. This cartoon has been reprinted widely and was just sent around the world again via Twitter after Charlie Hebdo with no controversy. And the reason is that Muhammad is cheerful, happy, and one of the guys. He's not portrayed negatively. And this is what the point I want to make, that it isn't about drawing Muhammad, it's how Muhammad is drawn. And it's the politics, it's not the image. And I have had this experience in other cartoons as well. Whoops. Wait, this isn't a gay wedding, is it? Well, about half my audience liked this cartoon a lot. About half my audience said one should not be putting a prophet in the newspaper. And then my Jewish readers said, "How dare you put leavened bread? That was a Seder dinner." I can't please everyone all the time. I said that was my artistic license. Have you ever tried to draw matzah? So again, but I've done cartoons. I did one with the Pope's coming to Philadelphia. I want you all not to be there. There's no room in Philadelphia next September. But the Archbishop liked it so much he sent it to the Vatican. It's like, okay, you can't do it sometimes, you can do it others. And we're covering the major religions I've pissed off over my career. This was a tiny little illustration in 1992 that went with a letter about Arab attacks on Israelis. It appeared on our letters page. Next day it was in bird cages. No one commented on it. About 3 months later, this was 1992, a woman named Lynn Yackel was running against Arlen Specter, our incumbent senator, and she was gaining on him. It was the year of the woman, Clinton was running, and Specter all of a sudden's camp got a little nervous, so they started a whispering campaign about her, saying that she was anti-Semitic. For the most minor infraction you can imagine, it didn't even involve her, but somebody at her church, a 1,000-member church. So there were letters to the editor about that, and just by happenstance, I drew this. with Lynn Yackel being asked to prove that she's not anti-Semitic. I was eviscerated for this tiny little cartoon. People called, they wrote, people came into the office and suggested to my editors that I find other employment, that I was called in letters feminism's own Goebbels, etc. There was a little blowback, let's just put it that way. But the argument was I should not use the Star of David in a cartoon. However, this was okay. This was not. And it goes back to my points on the other prophets that we have looked at. It's not it's not the symbol, it's not the prophet itself, it's the politics behind it. And every group holds certain things sacred. The question in front of us is whether we can let each group decide for everyone else what is sacred. And if we do, we will not be drawing cartoons. So that's, I turn it over now to Ann to continue on. Do I have one more?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Just a small history. It was an early style. It was my 1876 style. I used to sign them Joseph Kepler. If you take a look at this was a double truck in Harper's Weekly called The Religious Vanity Fair. If you start from the left, that is a stereotypical horrible Jewish person. The little next one to the right is the humbug Presbyterians. Way over on the right, it's the Catholics selling indulgences. The guy with his hand up is the Baptists offering baptism. You get over to polygamy, you have the Episcopalians selling ritual salvation, and the guy on the couch was the New Age minister of the time, Henry Ward Beecher, who was promising the love road to heaven. This is our heritage. It's irreverent, and it treats all treats all religions with a good dose of skepticism. My point is that, and my feeling is that as new religions come, this is the marketplace that they're entering, and if we treat all of them equally, they will show up in a cartoon like this too.
Is it this one to go forward?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I have to apologize. I, of course, came down with a cold first thing this morning, so my voice is like a couple of steps down. So I apologize for that. So Signe talked about symbols. I'm going to talk about the red line that everybody seems to be discussing, especially now with after Charlie Hebdo and Gary Trudeau. Of course, as Signe mentioned, this really did start in 2006 with the Danish cartoon controversy. This was a cartoon that I drew at the time in response to all the debate that was going on within the cartooning community here in the United States. People were very divided then. I would say at that point, really a lot of people thought that what the Danish cartoonists did was not appropriate. And I was frankly surprised at a lot of my colleagues, a lot of my liberal colleagues, that they really felt that they had definitely crossed over a line. But my point here was that everybody has their own red line. Everybody has a different opinion about what insults them, what makes them angry. So if you start doing red lines, I wanted to show that eventually you box in the cartoonist, the writer, the whatever. And that's the reason I created that one. Another thing that came out of the Danish cartoon controversy was just the different type of censors that we had around the world. Of course, you probably know that in Europe they have a lot of laws against the fact that a Holocaust denier, that you actually think that the Holocaust didn't exist. You're not allowed to say that. They throw people in jail for that. I think those people are nuts. I think they're crazy. They obviously don't know their history. But I don't think they should be thrown in jail, because all you're doing is you're just, ridicule them. Tell them they're stupid. Draw cartoons about them. But to make it against the law to say something idiotic, I think is idiotic. And this is kind of the way I feel about the whole thing. I'm all for free speech, unless I find it personally offensive. So now, getting around to Charlie Hebdo, that was a really difficult time. I think that really changed the conversation, at least in the cartooning community. And I really felt that was sort of going to be the catalyst for us. I really thought that was going to change even the cartoonists that had felt that the Danish cartoon controversy, the Danish cartoons were wrong and they shouldn't have done it. I thought that, killing 5 cartoonists in cold blood over what they drew would be enough for people to say, enough. That's ridiculous. As if we're going to be a civil society, that we're going to kill people over what they say and draw is just absurd. So I was not working for the Washington Post during the Danish cartoon controversy. But I was during Charlie Hebdo. I started in 2008. So this was my immediate response to the killings. I was shocked. It's kind of hard to do a hard-hitting cartoon when you're shocked. But this was after the iconic photograph of the Charlie Hebdo editor that he had on that same shirt, and he was holding up his fist after, I think, the bombings is what it was. The bombings of the Charlie Hebdo offices. I'm just showing you how this appeared online. I'm going to show you individual pieces so you can actually read it. This was a cartoon essay I did in response to, after the Charlie Hebdo killings, after the initial shock wore off and people condemned it, then all of a sudden we started having, not just with the cartoonists, with writers, talking about how, what the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists did was questionable. It was in bad taste. It was racist cartoons. It was anti-Semitic. It was whatever. So let me just go through the panels real quick. So now that the shock of the murders has turned to questioning Charlie Hebdo's satire, some cartoonists and writers have described the cartoons as anti-Muslim, blasphemous, offensive, and bigoted. The 2009 firing of a cartoonist who wrote an anti-Semitic column has also been mentioned. First of all, I am not a big fan of bathroom humor. Secondly, and more seriously, it's a valid discussion to have about why the divisions between people are so deep and our political discourse has become so toxic. However, that is not what we should be talking about now. Do we condone threats of violence toward individuals because of what they say or draw, regardless of how offensive the words or images are? No. Because what happens once we get beyond the easy images to condemn? And who makes that decision? All people must have the right to express themselves without fear, otherwise we risk losing our freedoms. So my point is, when we talk about what are offensive images and what should we not be drawing or what should we not be saying, my question back to you is, who makes that decision? Are we going to let government make that decision? Do we let individual religious institutions make that decision? I am all for letting the idiots say stupid things in order for us all to be able to say what we want to say. I'll put up with the dumb people in order to keep those freedoms. Am I done here? Or are we?
I don't know.
Let's
Take a
see
look.
where we're going. It's Signe.
Just one note on the Danish cartoons. Just as I said, at the Inquirer, the publication started a dialogue. It did in Denmark, too. And as a matter of fact, one of the young imams, who was really the one who went out of his way to find others to protest the cartoons, has since recanted his point of view and said that the paper should have the right to publish them. So again, a cartoonist is not the end of a cartoon is not the end of a conversation. It's the start of one. But you can't have a conversation if one of the people is shot dead. So I'm all for not shooting cartoonists personally, and I'm gonna say that publicly. This is just a little roundup that we're not alone in this discussion. Cartooning is a worldwide sport these days. This is Latouf from Brazil, who, and I apologize to my colleagues whose cartoons I'm about to show. I did not ask for their permission to show them at this, although I have asked Latouf in the past if I might. He's shooting to Charlie Hebdo and hitting the mosque in the back. But the reason we need to pay attention to, and this is the first day out, and there were tons of cartoons like this from cartoonists all over the world. But international cartoonists have other concerns as well. This is another one by Latouf, drawing about Muslims, it's freedom of speech. Drawing about Jews, it's anti-Semitism. And there's a big feeling among cartoonists around the world, not universally, but in many countries, that we are unequal in the way we treat things. So, but we should know that. I mean, we might not agree with it. We might think we're equal, but we should know how others perceive us. This is an Indian woman cartoonist, and she's gotten in trouble because she's talked about religious people in India and rape. So why don't you tell your guru to stop molesting the girls? Till then, cartoons on him will be continued. And that's a pretty brave cartoon for someone in India, especially a woman. It's not generally encouraged, apparently. She's had a lot of blowback. And lastly, this is the wonderful cartoonist Ali Ferzat from Syria, who was a very courageous anti-government cartoonist. And in 2011, someone, we don't know exactly who, I guess could be guessed, abducted him, several masked people, beat him, as you can see, and then stomped on his hands until they were broken. This is what cartoonists around the world not always face the same thing, but there's real persecution against them. But this is Ali Ferzat's reply. It's the spirit of cartoonists everywhere, and that's what we're tapping into here.
At this point, I'm going to ask Ann to show some of her most controversial cartoons, and if we have time later, we will try to access an additional controversial cartoon by Signe, if we can do that. But Signe's already covered some really controversial cartoons in her earlier remarks. So, okay.
Okay, so I'm going to show you two of them. The last one we're going to try to show at the end. Unfortunately it's an animation, so technology, we couldn't get it to work properly, and we were scared we couldn't come back to the slideshow. So I will tell it to you. But I was really pleased with myself. I didn't do this on purpose, but I actually have covered all three major religions to insult. Okay, so the reason I'm showing you three of these, I'm not exactly sure which one actually resulted in me getting threats, real threats. What happened was it was a Islamic group based in the UK. This is what I figured out later on. Islamic group based in the UK who went to my website and went into my archives and picked these cartoons and put them on an Iranian magazine website. And then I started getting these emails that all sounded alike about what an awful person I was for doing these. Which was fine. I don't care about that. We all get threats. It's no big deal. But then I got a couple of, I'm going to kill you threats from they traced them back to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. My first experience with the FBI. That was fun. So anyway, that was right after 9/11. This is before the Danish Cartoon controversy and Charlie Hebdo. This was fun. As you all might remember, the Catholic Church sex abuse scandal here in the States. I did many cartoons about that, got lots of reactions from people about how I was Catholic bashing. And this one was particularly an interesting one. The Minneapolis paper published it, so then I will read part of it if I can actually see it. Let's see. The Chancellor of the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis, wrote a letter. He didn't try to kill me, but he did write a letter to the editor. And he wrote, to use the Vatican's recent same-sex marriage document to portray the Vatican as lecherously winking at illegal same-sex unions and pedophilia is a vicious and unfair slur against our church, its religions, and its lay faithful. And my point about that is, I don't do cartoons blasting people for their individual religious beliefs. That's your deal. But if a leader of a church, if the leadership of a church inserts itself in the political process, which the Catholic Church does with their reproductive rights stances, they are fair game. So that is why I do these cartoons. And the last one we can't show you right now, but suffice to say, it's about Netanyahu. So maybe we'll see that later on. I don't know what's next. Do we look?
Okay. Do you want to say anything about?
Okay. Well, just briefly, the next section is on
Chick humor.
right. Cartoons about women, their position, and other gender issues.
And how we kind of, being female editorial cartoonists, how we kind of might take a little bit different take on things.
Okay, so I'm not going to. These aren't cartoons about politics and women's issues. I've done a ton on them, but there are really, I think, a few different. There are certain cartoons that I've done that I don't think a man would have done, and this is one of them. This is about me shopping with my daughter in the Britney Spears era. Okay, it's 4 parts. I'm not happy, but I get an idea. As again, I've been accused of being anti-Muslim, but you can use imagery in many different ways. And I appreciate the hijab for being there for me as a parent. Next one, if God had wanted women to have octuplets, I don't think so. Anyone who's actually birthed a baby would understand how difficult 2 would be as opposed to 8. That was, remember, when the Octomom was big. And I will. I actually think when people say, okay, how do you draw women? One thing, a woman does not have trouble drawing other women's breasts. They're not sex objects. They're just part of an anatomy. And I think if you look at various cartoons about women, I think sometimes, not always, there's a tendency to have trouble with that part of the anatomy. So a woman is a little freer, I think, or at least knows what she's talking about. This is about abortion. This is quite some time ago. She sees the results positive. She starts thinking, and it's dawn and it's dusk, and it's thinking. She goes to the abortion clinic and come back in 24 hours after you've thought it over. And the reason I did this was that I had had a baby. And I know the second that you think that you might be pregnant, that's the only thing that you think about. And so for a guy across the street at the Supreme Court to tell me that I need 24 more hours to think about it is just, to me, so insulting and has no understanding of what it's like to actually be pregnant, whether you want the baby or not. And lastly, I'll say, there's always talk about medical stuff having to do with women, and men too, but men don't have to read reports on whether a mammogram is a good idea or not. If women were meant to have mammograms. Thank you. And you want to do yours from the...
I'll just talk.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so continuing that theme. This is actually something I did in 2008 for the Hillary campaign when she got so much criticism about how she wasn't sensitive enough or feeling enough or caring enough or connecting with her voters. And of course this has come up again just recently. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. They want her to be tough, but they want her to cry too at the same time. So I started thinking about during the Salem witch trials, what did they do to find out if you were a witch? They threw you in the water, and if you floated, you were a witch. So therefore, they're going to now burn you at the stake. But if you actually drown, then you're innocent, but you're screwed. So I thought that's kind of apropos for Hillary.
Next.
I love these cartoons because I don't have to draw a lot. So this is, of course, the famous painting about the writing of the Constitution. So it's agreed we don't give women the right to vote. A good example of why diverse institutions are important. Oh, man. This is, I think it's getting a little bit better now. I did this in the early 2000s. But study shows 8% of women in movies are over the age of 35. It's no problem getting a 65-year-old guy with a 25-year-old woman on the screen. Lord knows. And I just wanted to show you this in terms of, to be a little bit more serious about why it's important to have women editorial cartoonists is, because we're women, we do notice things that happen to women. And when I first started out in editorial cartooning, I was reading the Christian Science Monitor a great deal, and they had some really great stories about the plight of Afghanistan women. And that's the first time I had ever heard about the Taliban. That was the first cartoon I ever did about the Taliban in 1996, which came back to haunt us and still haunt us. Is that it? Oh, no, this. If you're in D.C., you might remember that this was actually a photograph on the front page of the Washington Post where they showed George W. Bush signing one of those umpteenth partial birth abortion signings. And of course, every single lawmaker behind him was in a suit. A man.
That's a real power suit.
That is, yeah. Oh, and this, yeah, okay. This is my response to the gay marriage argument. Most of my male colleagues, would talk about gay marriage in the sense of, is it appropriate? Is it natural? Is it whatever? And I thought, let's talk about marriage as an institute just to begin with. It's not that it's been so great for women to begin with. It's in the beginning they kind of traded women for things. So I thought, well, why don't we just have this woman express to this newlywed couple, so which one of you gets to endure centuries of second-class status and being legally considered the property of your husband? I think that's it. Nope, we got one more. Okay. I guess this is insulting to someone. I don't know. But it was fun. And I think that is it. Yes. So
That's the end of the planned part of the presentation. I'd like to open up for questions to the two cartoonists right now. So, please.
Yes, we'll stand. We're short.
And I can also
Yeah.
I can try to access that animation.
Oh, why don't you do that while we
While
talk?
you talk, okay?
Okay, question number
on,
1,
guys.
way in the back, in the hat.
Have either of you had an editor cancel a cartoon you've done at your home paper?
Well, the one I showed early on was after I was not going to do a cartoon directly on Charlie Hebdo, or the Danish Cartoons, but eventually I did do one. So and I think it was a better cartoon because I paused and thought about it. There was one local cartoon that my cartoons appear in both the Inquirer and the Daily News. It appeared in the Daily News. The Inquirer did not want to run it, but I still think I thought it was a great cartoon, and but the Daily News did. So, editors, you can't figure them out. It's just,
Well, and along the same line, since we have the animation up, my editor backed me up completely on this one, Fred Hyatt at the Washington Post. I work at home, so this was
Shoot, I was trying to get it to run.
okay, I'll talk about it while she's retrieving it.
Okay.
Anyway, so I had done this over the weekend, and then I upload it, and then the editor will finalize it and take a look at it. So, I did that Sunday thinking nothing of it. It was about the bombings in Gaza last year, where all of you are probably aware that, a lot of Palestinians were killed, a lot of children were killed. And I thought, well, I want to do a cartoon about this. I don't want to put any blood in it or anything. I just want to do something criticizing really both sides, because children are innocent. Children don't have a say in this. They don't have a say whether or not they get bombed. So I drew Netanyahu doing this. Let's show.
All right, I'm trying to get it to.
And I apologize if you're going to watch an ad, but they do this.
Sorry, what?
Go down. And that's basically it. So you can, because it's going to roll over to the next one. So, see?
Okay. Oh, shoot. All right.
Mattress!
Okay.
So anyway, so what ended up happening is, I sent it in, didn't hear anything, and then by midweek, my direct editor, Jim, just kind of sends me an email and said, did you hear anything back about that cartoon? I'm like, well, I'm starting to get emails, a few of them, just regular old, you're an idiot stuff. And then come to find out, Monday morning, first thing, every single Israeli Jewish special interest group called Fred Hyatt's office to complain about that cartoon. And then there's an article in the Israeli, what is the Post? The Jerusalem Daily Post. Yes, Jerusalem Post, talking about it, and of course, having statements from different organizations. They didn't bother asking me about it, so I wasn't in there. And then I started getting another round of emails that were the most, I have never gotten emails like this before. I mean, every single cartoonist gets mean emails talking about what an idiot you are, you shouldn't be doing cartooning, you're this, you're that. This was the most misogynistic, disgusting emails I've gotten. I'm not saying it's from those organizations, because it wasn't. It was just from individuals. But I think it's indicative of where we're going, with conversation and social media. I'm not the first woman that's gotten that, but it was a first for me in my career. So I guess we could just continue with
other questions?
the hat.
Congratulations, Signe, on winning the Overseas Press Club.
Yay.
I'm curious because we've heard recently from foreign cartoonists who have come here and said when they want to do cartoons to translate across the world, removing text, relying on heavy imagery. Are there special things about what you do that you think play well overseas and bring it to you? Are there things you do that you're conscious of, I want this to play across the world, or not so much?
Go ahead. You're closest.
My work tends to be more image heavy than words. So I think that's just my natural tendency to do. Do it. I don't. No, I don't. I don't necessarily change anything that way. I mean, I think just the fact that we have the internet now is just an amazing development for editorial cartoonists, because we can reach so many people. Of course, it gets us in trouble too, and that's why we ended up with the Danish cartoon controversy.
I'm really a local cartoonist, so my stuff depends on people knowing what's going on in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, mostly, and the environs. So I don't think about how it's going to be playing in Beijing, because I don't think they're interested. Some of them have, as I said earlier, have on the more international topics have gone around, but I don't draw for an international audience. For the Philadelphia Daily News, Camden is a foreign assignment. How about?
I'm a sympathizer of the artist, first of all. But I realized there was I like better the second part where you guys are being humorous, showing the boobs and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But whatever. There's a more serious side to it when you talk about politics. And as an artist, I'm interested in your opinions about, because let's take for instance, there was a senator who went to, I think it was Japan, not too long ago, and he got sliced across the face because the guy said, "No war." So do you think that the artist is overstepping his or her boundaries in making political gestures at what we would call serious issues?
Well, I'm not sure how that. I think that was South Korea. Was the ambassador who was just coming out of a meeting, and I'm not sure how that translates to cartooning. But that's what we do. We take difficult cartoons, and difficult issues and tragedies sometimes, and try to give a connection, an emotional connection about how one could feel about them. So I think cartoons are sort of a link in a newspaper or website between an actual event and how people feel about that event. And of course, the reaction is different whether you agree with the cartoonist or not. And I think where it's going is that where once we were in broad-based publications like the Washington Post or my papers in Philadelphia, now people are going into more niche online publications, so that if people want to access a cartoonist, they go to the ones they already agree with and are happy with them. And then it's harder. I think the downside of that is that you don't start the conversation across party lines or ideological or religious lines. And I think that's not just about cartooning, but about the media generally, all sorts of things. That didn't answer your question, but Ann will answer it for you.
No, I know. Martha's going to answer.
Okay. I'd like to ask both of you why there are so few women in political cartooning. I know it's sort of a leading question, but I think it's important, to hear both your takes on that.
Without Charlie Hebdo, that would have been the first question.
Yeah, right. We've gone beyond, yes. I don't know. Because it started that way, because most editors were male and you feel more comfortable with someone that's like you. I don't know. I was in animation. We had the same issue there, that there weren't a lot of women in the beginning. It's changing. The reason I make fun of that question when it's asked is because it's like, for us, we don't, do we consider ourselves just women cartoonists? No. No.
We consider ourselves cartoonists.
Cartoonists.
God damn it!
You said, God damn it.
If there was a God, damn it. Oh, no.
Do you think that any of your more controversial cartoons any of the ones that got more of a reaction would have gotten less of a reaction if you were male.
Well, a lot of my hate mail begins, "Dear Mr. Wilkinson." Seriously, because my picture isn't in the paper and Signe is an ambiguous name. Ann, you're going to have to answer that one. But I don't think so. I think people are, if they hate an image, they hate the image whether you're a woman or a man.
Yeah, I don't, not really. I mean, I've done cartoons that have had the woman's point of view where I've gotten a couple of men's like, oh, you're just a man hater, but that's not that. Sandy.
I'm interested in hearing your reactions to Gary Trudeau's remarks regarding Charlie Hebdo. What he seemed to be pointing out was everybody should really be very much concerned about what they said, but on the other hand, that some of the Charlie Hebdo cartoons were really stirring a racist Islamic pot, anti-Islamic pot.
Go ahead, you first.
Me
Your
first?
turn.
You
Yeah.
first? Yeah, I actually wrote a response to Gary Trudeau in my Washington Post blog, which is an interesting experience for me because writing is not my thing, but sometimes you just need to write it. I don't agree with Gary Trudeau. I respect him, as I said in my column. I think he's really one of the greats in our field. I just think he chose some very unfortunate words. To throw hate speech in there, to describe me as a free speech fundamentalist, fanatic. That was it, fanatic. I just don't agree with that. Like I said, I think that it's important that we as a society discuss and debate these issues, but we're a civilized society. That's how we do it. We don't kill people, and we don't sit there and somehow explain people that kill people. And when he brings up disenfranchised and, what was the other term? Disenfranchised minorities. I mean, Signe and I, we've done so many cartoons about women's issues. You talk about a disenfranchised minority, women throughout the world. And unfortunately, women tend to get the real short end of the stick when it comes to religious organizations. They do. I mean, I know that's something that nobody wants to talk about, but it's true. So, like I said, I respect him. I just don't agree with him.
Ditto. I too think he's, a master of the craft. But I think what Ann's getting at about feeling slightly differently as a woman, the first people who get covered up and who get told that they can't be at the altar, or that they can't go to the Wailing Wall, or to offer their prayers in the same place men do. This is religion in action, and from a woman's point of view, it's always a little difficult to say, oh, okay, that's fine, and please go to my state legislature and pass some laws based on your religion. I just feel like, as Ann said, if you're going to enter into the political fray, and a lot of religions do, then you're part of politics, and you have to be treated as a politician. That's what cartoonists do. And so I feel that the specific problem, or the specific accusation, both for the Danish Cartoonists and the Charlie Hebdo cartoons, was that these people weren't really journalists. And the Danish cartoon, the magazine, was some right-wing rag. Well, Fleming Rose, the editor of that rag, was a foreign correspondent based here in Washington for many years, and then also in Russia. He speaks fluent English and fluent Russian. I've sat at a table with him where he's talking about towns, tiny little towns and their mayors in the Ukraine. This is a serious journalist. He didn't just cook this up on a whim, which is what he was accused of doing. So I reject that. It's an issue that's the issue of immigration is a live issue in many European countries. This is how they dealt with it, and one small sliver dealt with it. And again, it should have been the start of a conversation between people, not the end of it. And I would say the same thing for Charlie Hebdo, except, Charlie Hebdo, the cartoons, the circulation was going down. People weren't reading Charlie Hebdo. If they had just let them alone, there would have been one reader left, and that would have solved the problem for them, for the people who objected to them. And then there's always the ability to draw your own cartoons, and cartoonists around the world are doing that. So grab a pen, not a gun.
Way back.
I have a question on a lighter note. I was wondering if you all were both news hounds growing up, and if you weren't doing this, what do you think?
Were you news
Um, Well, at Girl Scout camp, I did the underground newspaper with a friend, but and at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia, where I worked to earn money to go to art school, we had the underground newspaper going there too. So I've been, interested in commentary generally, but I am not. I would not say I'm the best informed person in the entire United States of America, and I don't. I think one of the reasons I would never live in Washington is that that's all people talk about. It's boring after a while. That's why I like to do cartoons on different aspects of life, not just the day-to-day politics. So no, I'm not as big a news hound probably as I should be.
No, I didn't get into editorial cartooning until I was almost 30 years old. I started out as an animator. Everything you learn when you're young comes back later to help you. So I actually didn't even read a newspaper in my 20s. Isn't that horrible? I became interested in politics when I watched the Anita Hill hearings on television. And I was frankly appalled at what I saw with both sides of the aisle about the questions they were asking and things they were saying to Anita Hill. And having been a woman that worked in private businesses, and I just thought, you guys are crazy. Of course there's still sexual harassment, and of course we still have to deal with it. So that's when I decided to put together a portfolio and send it out. And I knew nothing about what I was doing, which is really good because ignorance is bliss. And that's how I got into the business.
Just one other thing about women not going into cartooning. I actually do think that there is a difference between, generally speaking, it's a huge spectrum, but women take things more personally. Generally, not, on average, I'm not making huge stereotypes, and there are clearly exceptions to all rules. But Steve and others in this room have gone to AAEC conventions. Our cartooning convention is like, oh yeah, I got a lot of reaction out of that one. Oh yeah, they really went after me on that one, and that's not generally the reaction that I hear from women. It's like, oh my God, they didn't like the color I did on that woman's dress in my cartoon. No, I'm not saying that. I didn't say that. Erase the tape. But I'll quit before I really bury myself. Yeah. Okay, fine. But I do think that that's a little bit of an issue.
Are we going on? Next question?
So one of the things that I read in Gary Trudeau's thing, and I read your response, which is one here, was he talked a little bit about responsibility, and he used that word, which I thought was going to be one of your words that you brought up. But my question is there a limit to satire? Are there things that are not satirical, and then are hate or problems or in some other way? How would you guys define that?
Limits in satire?
Are there?
Well, that's really interesting.
You were pretty black and white. Like there is no red line.
Right.
There can't be any. I have to be able to say everything.
Well, you know, it's
That's
funny.
not her.
It's funny you should ask that because I would encourage everyone to go to the C-SPAN archives and pull up Hustler v. Falwell. It's really interesting because they actually talk about, are there limits in satire? And they actually use Gary Trudeau as an example. They compare him to what Falwell does, to what Larry Flint does in Hustler. You know, his cartoons blasting H.W. Bush about his manhood in a box? Yeah. And compare what Larry Flint did in that Campari ad to what Gary Trudeau does in his cartoons about George W. Bush. And actually, it sounded like the court came to the conclusion that in America, now we're talking about America here, the First Amendment, your freedom of speech, you cannot limit that. Libel is something different, okay? That's something completely different. And that's what the court was trying to decide. But when it comes to satire, the word they used was you cause personal harm or something? Emotional distress, which basically means you're hurting my feelings. And is there a limit there? And the court came to the conclusion that there is not a limit. It cannot be, because then you start, then it's like, where is that line? Who's deciding that line? And if you, and I encourage you, go back and read that Campari ad. It's disgusting. It is just disgusting. And the court upheld it.
That would be the liberal William Rehnquist Supreme Court.
So to clarify, when you say that the Campari ad was disgusting, I believe you're saying that's something you would not have been involved with. You would not draw, or I have no idea what was in this ad. That's something you wouldn't do. So if we're talking about the limits of satire, you're saying, and I agree with you, there should be no governmental limits on satire, but you as the individual cartoonist draw your own limits on what you think is satirical versus what you think is hateful or disgusting or something else.
Well, we are professionals. You know, we do know what we're doing. I think that's why we always get so pissed off when government tries to tell us what to do with our bodies. We're adults. We can decide ourselves. And it's the same thing with satire. You know, the thing that I do not want the tools being limited to me. If I decide an image needs to be used because what I believe is so strong about the subject matter that I need to do something that's going to get your attention, doesn't mean I'm going to use it. But I'm just saying is I don't want to see people limit that. Because I think I know this is a cliche, it's a slippery slope if you start doing that. Because if you start telling people, I don't like that, there's a lot of stuff I don't like that's going on in this world. You know, and if I wanted to start killing people over it, then you'd have a problem. But the problem is what people think is and isn't acceptable. So I don't know where I'm going with that, but go ahead.
Well, one thing I thought was interesting in the pieces in response to Gary Trudeau was that a number of cartoonists actually said they had personal limits, and they talked about what they would not choose to show in their cartoons. And anyway, that's just a point that I think.
But the point is nobody's telling them what their limits are. Yeah.
Have either of you drawn cartoons that you wish you hadn't drawn and published? That you take back?
Oh, only about 40% of them. No.
I mean, at the point where maybe you thought, well, maybe I did cross that line. Maybe I shouldn't have done that.
There are a couple that people took as way that I didn't mean them. It wasn't that my point was so extreme, but it was a bad cartoon. If I didn't get my point across and somebody felt that it was, that it was saying something I didn't mean to be saying, that's not a good cartoon, and I wish that I'd done it differently, especially ones that people, one in particular I remember was really taken wrong by an individual, and I didn't mean to harm that person. I had meant it actually in support. So that was my
Mistakes were made.
yes, my yeah.
Yeah, it's basically if your cartoon is isn't the way you wanted it to be come across. But we take that responsibility on ourselves. I mean, we'll question ourselves and go, oh, well, why didn't I do it a certain way? Or if you release it on a certain day.
Oh, you're being such a woman.
I was wondering whether the reactions to your more controversial or politically incorrect cartoons, if the reaction varies by age or generation at all. Like in particular,
Yes.
do those under 30, do they take it about the same as everybody else, or are they more accepting, less accepting?
Well, since we don't have any newspaper readers under 30,
Right.
it's really hard to judge. But I think, yes, I think you're right. And I think if you look at the styles of younger cartoonists, they're quite different than my style and Ann's style. So the next generation of cartoonists is going to express things in very different ways. So I do think that there's a difference.
Is there any cartoonist in the United States who is as provocative as the cartoonist who worked for Charlie Hebdo?
Mr. Fish, Dwayne Booth, great stuff. Go look at it.
One more and then we'll wrap it up. Yeah.
Yeah, when you mentioned the limit of satire should be what is acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
By people, you mean the powerful majority or the targeted minority?
Could you repeat that, please? I'm not sure.
The limit of satire you mentioned that it's
Uh-huh.
acceptable to me. By people, you mean the larger, powerful majority or the targeted minority?
Well, I think this actually gets to some of the point that Gary Trudeau was making. He was saying that as I understand it, that the cartoons in Charlie Hebdo punched down on people who were not in the majority, and therefore it was a cheap shot because they don't have the same power as the majority, either the majority of the cartoonists or the majority in the country. And I think that generally speaking, cartoons are seen as more powerful when they are going after powerful people. I mean, they're the ones who are setting the examples in the world. However, it's hard to say who's on top and who's on bottom sometimes. I think when you're looking at, we'll just say Muslims at this point in France, they're a minority, but in the headlines, when a group that identifies as a Muslim group takes over an entire region of a country and starts executing people and demanding forced conversions, et cetera, et cetera. It's the same overall group, but I don't feel like I'm punching down to criticize them. So I think it really depends on what the issue is and where it is you're focusing. But it gets back to the whole the global world. People may feel disenfranchised one place and quite franchised in another place, even though the large umbrella would put them, they would both be under the same large umbrella. So that's again, one of the problems in sending cartoons across cultures and countries.
Thank you. So, I'd like to thank both of our cartoonists again, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming.
Yes.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.